All right, hi everybody. Today I want to talk about a passage. Really, what I want to talk about today is the essence of sin. We're going to look at a passage that really defines biblically and kind of from God's perspective what sin is. And yeah, that doesn't sound like a really cheerful devotional to talk about what sin is, but the good news is as we kind of understand what sin is, we're also going to understand how to fight against it. And so the good news here is when we get to the end of this little study, this little passage, is we're going to see God's prescription for us to fight against sin. So let's get into it. I'm looking at Jeremiah chapter 2 today. Jeremiah's a prophet, which means he would often speak for God. He would preach the word that God had given him, but sometimes he would even speak as though he were God. And so this part of Jeremiah chapter 2 is in God's voice, and really it starts with God leveling a charge, bringing almost a court case against his people. So here it is, Jeremiah 2 verse 9. God says, "Therefore I bring charges against you again, and I will bring charges against your children's children." And then verse 10 and 11, before getting to the charges, God starts with a kind of a rhetorical question. He says, "Cross over to the coast of Cyprus and look, send to Kedar and observe closely, see if there's ever been anything like this. Has a nation ever changed its gods? Yet they're not gods at all. But my people have exchanged their glorious God for worthless idols." So here's the rhetorical question right at the beginning of verse 11. Has a nation ever changed its God? God says, cast your vision across the lands, the neighboring lands of Israel, and just ask yourself, has any nation that's following a God changed to follow a different God? And of course, the parentheses here remind us, well, look, they're not even gods. They're idols, but these other nations, Cyprus and Kedar, they've got their idols that they follow. They don't just willy-nilly switch. And yet, so here's the charge. Here's what the charge God's leveling against his people. My people have exchanged their glorious God for worthless idols. So this doesn't happen. Other nations don't do this, and yet somehow God's people have traded in their glory, their glorious God, the God who led them out of Egypt, the God who settled in a cloud of glory on the temple, the glorious one. They've traded him, the living God, for worthless idols. And this is astonishing. That's the next verse. God says, "Be appalled at this." It's appalling. You haven't. Shudder with great horror. God says creation looks at this and they can't understand the exchange that's taking place here. Why would God's people trade him for idols, for worthless idols? And then verse 13, and here we're going to get to the essence of sin. So this is the same thing that God has just said, only now he's going to give us an image. He's going to give us an analogy to maybe understand this better. And he's going to say, so the essence of sin is this. There are two sins, he says, but it's two sides of the same coin. It's the same sin. It's two choices that we make whenever we sin. And this is the essence of pretty much every sin that anybody can commit. Graphically given to us here in this image. So my people have committed two sins. They've forsaken me, the spring of living water, and they've dug their own cisterns, broken cisterns that hold no water. So here are the two sins. God says, here are the two choices people are making. First of all, they've forsaken me. Right? They've traded in the glorious God. That's me, God says. They've forsaken me. They've turned their backs on me. And who am I? I'm the spring of living water. So people, they've lost their taste for God. Here's God, the source of life, living water, and the people have turned their back on that. And what have they done instead? Here's the second sin. Instead, they've dug their own cisterns. They've gone digging in the dirt. They've gone searching for other places to drink. A cistern is in the ancient world, they would dig storage chambers underground to pour water into, preserve it in a pretty arid climate. And so they've gone digging for these cisterns. But here's the deal. Their cisterns are broken. They don't even hold water. They can't hold water. The water in them is leaking out into the earth. And so here are people digging and searching for a source, and they're sucking on dirt. God says they've turned their backs on me. The source of life, the source of water, and they've gone to slake their thirst in the dust. And it's appalling. It doesn't make sense. The heavens should shudder in horror at this. And so here's my definition from this verse of what sin is. Here's the essence of sin. It's a great sin to lose your taste for God. It is an appalling sin to lose your taste for God, your desire for God, and flip side of the same coin, it is a great sin to prefer anything more than God. When we go searching for other things to satisfy us, to slake our thirst, when we go searching for anything, even good things in this world, and prefer them more than God, that is the very definition of sin. So let me do this graphically. Let me kind of run through this again, the same verse, only kind of give it to you in a graphic picture. So as I read this verse, what I hear is God saying, look, all of us, we're thirsty. We have a soul thirst. So I picture our souls like a bucket, like this vessel that holds water. And what we want, what we all desire, is something that will fill that bucket. And the fuller that bucket gets of joy and purpose and contentment and peace, and the further full that bucket gets, the better it feels. That's what our souls are looking for. And God comes to us and he says, look, I will fill your bucket. I am the source of living water, and I will fill you to the brim. And the best part is that I'm a spring, so I'm a fountain of living water. I never run dry. I never run out. You drink as much as you want, and there will always be more. And God says, come, fill your bucket. And what we do far too often, instead of drinking from the fountain of life, is what we do is we go and we search out our own buckets. And we go searching for our satisfaction. We go searching for our joy in our own buckets, and they end up being buckets that leak. They won't hold water. They don't satisfy. They say, oh, that looks like that maybe that would satisfy. And we go and we take a drink and we find it's dribbling out, it's running down, and it's not there. And so you take this definition of sin, this turning your back on God, losing your taste for God, and preferring anything more than God, and apply that to anything that we think of as sin, and you'll see that this is true. So we, greed. Greed is a sin, and it's the bucket of money, right? We go searching for satisfaction in the bucket of money, and we think that'll make us happy, and we'll have more stuff, and we'll accumulate more, and then we'll finally be satisfied. And yet, far too often, we find that it's not enough. I've got the latest fashion, but now there's a new fashion. I've got to have that. I got the latest iPhone. Now they've come out with a new one. I've got to have that. And I need more, and I need more, and I need more. And it just keeps leaking out. Or we try to fill the bucket of sex. We go to drink from the bucket of sex and pornography or lust or adultery, and we think that'll satisfy and that'll be enough. And then we find it's not enough, and then we want more, and we need to go looking deeper, and we need to find different experiences, and it leaks out. Or anger, the bucket of having my own way, and it leads to anger and being a bully and being rude to people and even violent with people. And when we turn away from God, when we turn away from the spring of living water, and we try to find our satisfaction in these other buckets, we find they just don't hold water. And so the places, the broken cisterns that we desperately go searching for, they're the fruit of sin. They're not the root of sin. The root of sin is when we lose our taste for God, when we turn our back on God, and we prefer anything more than God. Okay, so that's the bad news. That's the essence of sin, Jeremiah 2, verse 13. But I said there's some good news here, right? Because if that's what sin is, if we understand that's what sin comes from, so then the solution, the way we fight against sin is when we get our taste for God back. When we go back to that spring of living water, when we let him fill our bucket, and when we drink deeply, the more deeply we drink of God, the more satisfied we are with God, the less we're going to be looking for those other buckets to satisfy that thirst, the less interested we're going to be in those leaky cisterns. And so here's the even better news. It's not like we have to go find this source of water. It's not like we have to go searching for this spring of living water. I think of like the legend of Ponce de Leon hacking through the swamps of Florida looking for the fountain of youth, right? And this idea of having to go on some sort of quest to find this a source of water that'll satisfy. And the Bible says, no, you don't need to go looking for it. He came looking for you. Right? God says, look, I will come to you. I'm the living water, and I will come to you. Jesus, born to a virgin in Bethlehem, he comes to earth, and he says, look, I am the living water. Come to me. John 7, verses 37 and 38, Jesus stands up in the middle of Jerusalem, and this is what he says, let anyone who's thirsty, come to me and drink. And whoever believes in me, as Scripture has said, rivers of living water. Right? That sounds familiar. Jeremiah 2, we forsake the living water. And Jesus says, no, come to me. Rivers of living water will flow into you and flow out of you. Anyone who's thirsty, come to me and drink. We don't have to go looking for this fountain. He came looking for us. And so, drink deep, my friends. Drink deep of God. Drink deeply of the gospel of the grace of Jesus, and find that your souls will be satisfied.